all of you for coming out this evening to see and hear the results of the feasibility study for the 1820 Courthouse and the surrounding buildings. What I'd like to do is just give you a brief history of the town's involvement with that building to date, and then we'll have a full presentation by the architect and the select members of the 1820 committee. I would like to introduce who's sitting up here on the panel this evening, because these people and the ones I introduce a little bit later are going to be key if you have questions about this project at all. This is a group and the individuals that you can go to that have been involved from the very beginning. Martha Warenfels has been the primary architect, as well as Cecilia Hallahan, on this project. David Peck, the chairman of the building committee, I know that you're all very familiar with. Selectman Tavares is here with us this evening, as well as Lynn Barrett, the finance director. Mark Garrett is here from the planning board, as well as John Moody, who's vice chairman of the advisory and finance committee. We also have Bill Cohan, who is from the Community Preservation Committee, and Donna Curtin, who will be speaking from the Plymouth Antiquarian Society. But we have some other members that are here in the group that have also been part of the process and are going to be that great resource that you can use. I know Julie Barry from the Historic Commission is here, and I think Mike Tubin, who is chairman, also came in. Julie has been very involved from the beginning, though, so she'll be a great source to go to. Plymouth Redevelopment Authority members, Bob Molnar and Dean Rizzo, are also here in the audience. They can be a resource. Leighton Price from the Plymouth Growth and Development Corporation, I believe, is here. I see him in the audience. Consortium member Mike Hamlin is also here, as well as school committee chairman Dennis Begley. Staff members, Chief Bradley is towards the back of the room, as well as Tiffany Park, Lee Hartman, and Pam Hagler. Finance Committee Chairman Robert Nasso could not be here this evening, but he will also be valuable as part of this. And finally, I just want to mention community members Helen and Paul Hapgood, only because they did attend every single meeting that we had on this, so they will be able to fill you in on some of those details. The topic of what to do with the 1820 Courthouse, and really that corridor in the Commissioner's Building that you've heard everyone speak about, has been discussed for years. You have a 2004 published letter that's available on the table over on the side if you did not pick one up. That's a letter to the editor that is from Reverend Peter Gomes, who wrote about the potential for making the building the townhouse. And I certainly remember hearing that the courthouse site should be town hall from Enzo Monti back in 2005. Well, the town may not have known what the building should become, but they did overwhelmingly support the purchase in 2009. Once bought, the town leased it to the Plymouth Redevelopment Authority, who really made every effort to secure the building and come up with consensus for the future of the site and any development that should take place there. The recurring theme almost everywhere that we went and people that we talked to in the sessions that we held was that the courthouse should remain public in some fashion. The selectmen held a historic joint meeting in March of 2013 that included members from the school committee, the redevelopment authority, the community preservation committee, finance committee, planning board, and building committee. So all those boards and committees that have been appointed or elected that are in place to help guide the governance of this community. And it was decided that for once and all, we would pursue the concept of this site becoming a government center. We knew that an undertaking of this size, even with those community leaders in agreement that we should look at this, would require a united vision and support of town meeting. And town meeting provided us with that support. It was apparent in the spring when many of you here tonight voted to move forward with this study. We are here this evening to show you the results of that commitment. But before we start with the formal presentation, I just want to add a few comments about the process and the development in general. As a community, we need to weigh this project in terms of preservation of a special building, one that so many of you consider and have said to me it's really the heart of the downtown. Look at the importance of revitalization of that area and the impact of reusing a historic site, the upcoming growth of the town as our services expand with our growing population, and the intriguing blending in of a tourism component in the project, and you'll see the details of that, and certainly the financial aspect. How will you all be impacted from a cost perspective? We intend to cover all those topics because we understand that a project of everything we're looking to do at that site and how much significance it will have in the downtown area and to the community as a whole requires extensive public input. This is not a foregone conclusion. This is something that we really need to hear from all of you about. What we hope you take away from tonight is an understanding of the detailed results of the feasibility study, a willingness to reach out to your neighbors, your friends, your constituents if you're a town meeting member, and talk about this. Reach out to any one of us, ask your questions, and start to think about this proposal and get their reaction on what it will mean, not just for now, but in the future of the community. We know the project has merit and is a long-term investment, but we just need to know if the town is willing to invest everything they need to make the project a success. So with that, I'm going to invite Martha to join us and to go over the project detail.
Thank you, Melissa. Can everybody hear me okay? Is this mic properly set up? Thank you for coming to hear about this project tonight. It's been a really exciting project for us to work on. And the first thing I'd like to do is to introduce my team in a little bit more detail. I'm Martha Werenfels, a principal with Durkee, Brown, Viveros, and Werenfels Architects. With me tonight is Cecilia Hallahan, who was the project manager for this project. And Cecilia is responsible for much of the work that you'll see here tonight. We were also assisted in our office by Ashley Prester, by Matthew Valero, and by Nick Baldassar. And with us tonight is Jonathan Staubach, who's sitting in the front row. Jonathan Staubach is with VHB. They were our civil engineer and traffic engineer. And also working on the project with us was Talevi and Heishi, who was our professional cost estimator. So this was very much a team effort, and we also worked very closely throughout this process with the 1820 committee. And it was really a pleasure to work with that committee, a very thoughtful committee that provided a lot of insight to us and input into the project as it moved forward. Very, very briefly, to give you a little bit of background with respect to our firm, just so that you know where we're coming from in terms of the experience that we bring to this project. Durkee, Brown, Viveros, and Werenfels is a 25-person firm in Providence, and much of the work that we do involves historic and existing structures. We've had the great honor to have worked on some very significant historic buildings, including landmark structures in Rhode Island and Massachusetts and Connecticut. They've included the Rhode Island State House, the Tabernacle on Martha's Vineyard, the International Tennis Hall of Fame in Newport, the Cranston Street Armory. Sorry. This slide includes those buildings, the State House, the Cranston Street Armory, the Tabernacle on Martha's Vineyard. We've also worked on quite a number of buildings that have a lot in common with the 1820 Courthouse. We've been involved in a lot of 18th, 19th, and 20th century historic masonry buildings, including many industrial buildings, brick buildings, granite buildings. On the right-hand portion of this slide is the Taunton City Hall, which is a large granite structure, and we recently did quite a similar feasibility study for the city of Taunton to determine how they might reuse their historic building, which unfortunately had suffered a fire, and they were trying to determine the best way to reuse their monumental historic building. So we completed that feasibility study shortly before we began working here in Plymouth. With respect to this particular project, which is of course the most important one before us right now, I'd like to emphasize that what we were hired to do and to work with the 1820 committee on was a feasibility study. So I'll be presenting some images of what the building might look like. I'll be presenting floor plans and site plans, but please bear in mind that in a feasibility study, the real purpose of this project is to determine the feasibility of it. How could it work? What might it cost? What might the building look like? How many departments can be accommodated in the building? That sort of thing. But if this project moves forward, it will be developed in much greater detail and will be refined further than what we're presenting here tonight. I'm sure you all are familiar with the site. In the aerial photograph, you can see the 1820 Courthouse building. At the center of the photograph, immediately behind it, is the Commissioner's building. Then there are some historic residences and the DPW building at the top of the hill. And as I'm sure you're all very, very familiar, there's quite a steep incline from the bottom of the site to the top of South Court Street. So our feasibility study really broke out into two separate sections. The first part was due diligence, so that involved us meeting with the 1820 committee to establish goals and objectives for the project. We reviewed previous studies that had been done. There was an excellent historic structures report completed by CBT of the 1820 courthouse, and that provided us with a very good foundation upon which we could build in determining how the building might be renovated and reused. We spent quite a bit of time in each of the existing buildings and observed the conditions in each one of them. We distributed a programming questionnaire to department heads within Town Hall to determine what kind of needs they had and how those could be accommodated in a new or renovated building. We determined square footage requirements based on the results of that questionnaire. And we determined what the fit would be between the existing buildings and what the questionnaire told us was needed in terms of square footage. So again, the feasibility study area included the courthouse corridor, which encompassed the buildings that I described previously, as well as the existing town hall at 11 Lincoln Street. So the first thing we did was generate three-dimensional drawings of the existing courthouse and associated buildings. The town provided us with an engineered site survey of the existing site that you see here on the bottom that indicates the buildings that are located within the courthouse corridor. We then, as I said, visited each of the buildings, spent time in every square foot of each building to assess the conditions and analyze what the existing buildings contained so that we would know how we could then fit the program of a proposed town hall into the existing buildings and whether they were suitable for that type of reuse scenario. So I'm sure you're all familiar with the 1820 courthouse, but a few of the observations we made and sort of important characteristics of this building included the fact that the building has had many additions over the years. So there's the 1820 courthouse, but it's really comprised of several different generations of building. And as one steps up the hill, the portions that were added to the building are later in sequence. So there's the 1820 section, but then there are many additions as well. And the additions are not as historically or architecturally significant as the front portion of the building facing the square. It was also important for us to note that as the building steps up the hill, there's sort of a breakup in the massing. It's not like one big block of a building. It has wings and it has things that kind of break down that massing as the building steps up the hill. Inside the building, of course, the most important space is the courtroom, but there are also a number of spaces that are less important and that have been significantly altered. So our focus was primarily on preserving the historic courtroom, and then in terms of the additional spaces, we looked at whether or not they had been altered or were in not very good condition as we looked at a reuse scenario for the building. Immediately behind the 1820 courthouse is the Commissioner's building. It's not in very good condition. This was observed in the historic structures report that was developed prior to our getting involved in this project, and it was certainly, that observation was certainly confirmed by our visits to the building. I'm a big fan of green buildings, but I'm not sure that this is a good thing. This amount of plant material on a masonry structure, as you can imagine, causes damage. And that damage was quite evident inside the building. There's significant cracking of the masonry walls, and there is significant water infiltration that's occurring within those masonry walls. So this building, as a potential reuse scenario, was much more difficult to foresee than the 1820 courthouse. It was in much worse condition, and its floor plan is such that it's not an efficient building to reuse, and I'll talk a little bit more about that as the presentation progresses. Behind the Commissioner's building, up the hill a little bit further, are 3 historic residential buildings. They're most likely vestiges of a more extensive residential neighborhood that used to occupy this area and was probably later replaced by the courthouse building and the Commissioner's building. But these are, perfectly nice historic residences just up the hill from the Commissioner's building. And then beyond the residences is the DPW building, which is not a historically significant structure. And it also suffers a bit from the fact that it literally sits in a sea of asphalt. The building is completely surrounded by paved areas, and there's little delineation between the road and the parking areas associated with the building. So it really sits in this big, broad asphalt area through which people drive. We also looked at 11 Lincoln Street, where Town Hall is currently located, and observed the conditions there. We did observe that there is a fair amount of crowding currently, quite a bit of crowding in this building. You have very tight workstations. In terms of ADA and handicap accessibility, there are many areas that are not accessible because there are such tight conditions. You have rooms that are serving multiple functions, sometimes more than one function at the same time. Storage is quite problematic in the existing town hall. There simply isn't enough storage space for the existing departments, so you run into situations where materials are stored in front of shelving, and there clearly is not enough storage space to accommodate the existing program that's occurring in the building. We also looked at the school department building at 253 South Meadow Road because looking at the school department as part of this analysis was within the scope of our feasibility study to determine whether or not the school department could also fit within the courthouse corridor. So we did look at the conditions at 253 South Meadow Road. And as I mentioned previously, we developed a questionnaire and distributed this questionnaire to each department head, and also Melissa filled one out for the town hall as a whole. So each department responded to this questionnaire and told us things about the needs of their particular department. How many private offices do you need? How many shared offices? How much conference room space is required? How much storage space? What number of filing cabinets do you need to accommodate? All these things that a typical office department requires were described in these questionnaires so that we could then take the results of all of these responses and compile them to determine how many square feet would be needed in a new building. We also physically visited each department so that we could have a greater understanding of the responses to that questionnaire. Once those results had been received, we developed an Excel spreadsheet that tabulated all of the results and determined the square footage requirements of all the feedback that we received from the various departments. With that information, we met again with Melissa to determine, okay, this is what people need in their various departments. How can we make it as efficient as possible in terms of shared conference room spaces, shared copy rooms, all the functions within a town hall that can be used by multiple departments? Where can we have overlap so that we're not creating redundancy in a new building or in a building that's renovated, so that ultimately the program could be as efficient as possible, but still accommodate the existing departments and the growth that they were projecting over the next 15 years. So the results of that exercise were that 253 South Meadow Street, the existing building has 15,000 square feet. The programming exercise determined that that department actually needs 27,000 square feet of space. 11 Lincoln Street, the existing building where Town Hall is, currently has 40,000 square feet. 11 Lincoln Street also has 49 parking spaces, and the school department has currently 37 employees. So there is the possibility that the school department could fit very comfortably within 11 Lincoln Street. Our survey of the town hall again indicated the building that they're currently occupying is 40,000 square feet. The requirements of the new programming exercise were approximately 70,000 square feet, so you can see they're really quite congested in their existing space. The existing courthouse building without the basement has approximately 22,000 square feet. The Commissioner's building has 14,000 square feet. There are 173 parking spaces existing in the courthouse corridor, and the existing number of employees for Town Hall is 97. The projected number of employees is 123. So the conclusions that we drew of this due diligence portion of our feasibility study were the following. The combined program of the school department and the town hall functions requires 90,000 square feet, which is a lot of square footage to try to accommodate in the courthouse corridor. So that seemed like too much building to try to either renovate or build new within the courthouse corridor, given the fact that the courthouse corridor is within a very important historic context. So we didn't want to propose anything that wasn't appropriate to that historic context and that wasn't within the scale of the historic buildings that are there already. But the school department does fit comfortably at 11 Lincoln Street, and because they don't need to occupy the entire building, there would be an opportunity if the school department moved there for the Mayflower room to remain as it is for a multi-purpose function for general meetings and for shared storage for the town to continue to occur within the basement of 11 Lincoln Street. We did determine that even if the school department moved to 11 Lincoln Street, a fairly large addition to the historic courthouse would be necessary to accommodate the new program for Town Hall. We did determine that it was probably wise to think about demolishing the Commissioner's building and the DPW building. That decision with respect to the Commissioner's building was largely due to the conditions that we observed and to the inefficiencies of its plan. And with respect to the DPW building, it's not an architecturally or historically significant building. And we also focused on the front section of the 1820 courthouse as being the most significant. So part two of the feasibility study was to develop a conceptual design based on those conclusions that we came to during part one. To do this, we completed scale and volumetric studies of the site and of the buildings. We worked very closely with the 1820 committee to select a site design strategy and to develop that as we moved forward. We created department layouts within the new building, and then we refined the design scheme of the whole building based on everyone's input. So going back to the existing conditions, again, the existing 1820 courthouse with the most significant piece being on the front and the later additions stepping up the hill. This is the Commissioner's building beyond. You can see here what I was referring to in terms of the floor plan, the footprint of the Commissioner's building. It's a not efficient building for reuse as a town hall. Also, it's important that these are the earliest sections of the courthouse, and these are later additions. And in fact, these two additions are as recent as the 1960s. And then we have the DPW building here. So we looked at several different ways to preserve the historic structure and add on to it in a way that was sympathetic to the historic character of the building and the historic context on the hill. So the first sort of quick volumetric study we did was sort of an H-shaped plan that would be attached to the historic courthouse and located behind it. We also looked at a scheme which would have sort of a hyphen attaching the two buildings to each other and a larger new structure behind with this sort of connector back to the historic building. The third volumetric study we looked at had a new piece that sort of stepped from the lower roof of the courthouse and became larger as it stepped up the hill. So we looked at these various scenarios, we presented them to the 1820 Commission, we discussed the pros and cons of each, and of course at the end of the day what we developed further was kind of an amalgamation of all three. There were attributes of each one that I think ended up in the final version of our conceptual design. So what we agreed upon with the 1820 committee was that the following were the really important design considerations to carry forward as we refined the way in which this building would look. We wanted to reinforce urban revitalization goals so that this building would really contribute and reinforce what could be happening in Plymouth. We wanted to preserve the grandeur of the 1820 courthouse. We wanted to promote a healthy, walkable community so that if town hall employees are in a building that's now located in the heart of Plymouth, it becomes a very walkable community. Hopefully people can use public transportation. They can walk to local restaurants for lunch. They can walk to local restaurants after the workday ends. We wanted to break down the scale of the building as it steps up the hill, so we were very sensitive to not proposing to build too large a building within the historic context. We wanted to create very inviting public spaces, to improve parking conditions over what currently exists at Town Hall. And one thing I didn't mention in looking at the previous slides is one of the difficulties that I'm sure many of you are familiar with at the existing Town Hall site is not only the lack of parking, but the congestion that occurs on Lincoln Street, particularly during school, when school lets out. So one of the real restrictions at the existing site on Lincoln Street is that just congested parking and frankly a dangerous situation when kids are being picked up at school and people are trying to go to Town Hall. And our traffic engineers, our civil engineers, did a study of traffic patterns, and they found that people were visiting Town Hall mostly towards the end of the day, exactly at the time when there's the most traffic from people picking their children up at school. So it's kind of a perfect storm on Lincoln Street at certain times of the day. So we hoped in this scenario to improve upon parking conditions and traffic. And then finally in our new scheme there was a desire to incorporate public restrooms that could serve the town even when the town hall was not open. So a kind of a separate public restroom that could be available to visitors to Plymouth. So this is the conceptual design that we arrived at. As you can see, we have preserved the most historically significant portions of Town Hall. We've created a connector between the historic building and our new building, which is behind Town Hall and steps up the hill. And it does pick up on that H-shaped plan so that it reads volumetrically as a series of smaller buildings and additions to the historic buildings, and it in no way dominates the 1820 courthouse. We hope that it complements the 1820 courthouse. This is an aerial view, which of course no one will see, but I think it best explains the overall concept for the project. But what one actually, I'm sorry, I'm going to go back a second. Two features that I'd like to point out in this aerial view. There are two features within this design that are optional. So the building could proceed forward and be constructed with or without these two features, depending on the budget and which amenities the town is interested in including. The first of those is a small green roof on top of the connector. We think it's a good thing to add to the building. It helps make the building more sustainable, but it's clearly an optional feature of the building. It does provide an amenity too for the people who are in offices who are looking down on that roof. The second optional feature is this public space on the top of the new addition, which is a roof terrace that you'll see in the floor plans. It is accessible to a main corridor, so it's a place that the public could actually come to get on top of the new addition and look out over Plymouth Harbor. and towards the historic cupola, and I'll show an image of that. But again, the green roof and this roof terrace are both optional features that could either be included or not as this design progresses. In this next scheme, you can see what the building would look like without that optional roof terrace. It would have a dormer with more floor space instead of an outdoor area. As I mentioned, the previous illustrations were aerial views that explain the project, but nobody would see the building in that way unless you're in a hot air balloon. This is really how the building would be perceived from Court Street. As you can see, the grandeur, the importance of the 1820 building is preserved, and our new addition steps up the hill behind the main building, and it maintains the proportions, the materials, and sort of the rhythm and scale of the historic building without attempting to be imitative. We're not trying to suggest that the new building looks historic, but we are proposing a building which we think is very compatible with the historic building and is suggestive of the sort of way in which New England meeting houses and other types of public structures often developed over time, where they did step up a hill or have additions that occurred kind of organically over the course of time. Between the historic building and our new addition, we have a glass atrium which would serve as one of the main entrances to the new building. So most people would enter the new building sort of between the old and the new, so you really have a distinction between the two, and you also have a sense of space through which you can enter and then proceed to the various departments. And that atrium could be entered from North Russell Street or South Russell Street. At the top of the hill would be the entrance that's probably used the most because it's located closest to where the parking is. So at the top of the hill, again, this is the new portion of the building. You can see the 1820 courthouse a little bit in the distance, but we would have a very significant entrance at the top of the hill as well, so that on a daily basis, people would enter here and actually be entering the building on the second floor, which is the floor on which the courthouse exists in the historic building. The hill gave us the opportunity to do this so that when you enter here, if you were, I'll show this in a plan, but if you were to go straight down the hall, you'd be at the level of the historic courthouse. In the previous slide, if you entered into the atrium, you were entering one story down. And the hill is steep enough for us to be able to accommodate that without any sort of manipulation of the landscape. This is the roof terrace that I mentioned. Again, it's optional, but if there were an interest in creating this, it really is a good place from which this rendering is based on actual photographs that we took from the cupola and from various vantage points. So from this area, you actually could, it's a little light in this picture, but you actually can see the harbor and, of course, get an up-close and personal view of the beautiful historic cupola over the courthouse. In terms of the floor plans, this is the atrium that I mentioned, so that can be entered from either North or South Russell Street. This provides sort of a gathering space from which visitors can proceed either into the historic courthouse on the first floor of the town clerk's offices, or one can proceed into the bottom floor of the new addition, and on this level, because it's somewhat set into the hill, that bottom floor contains more sort of utilitarian functions in the back, some mechanical areas. I have to put on my glasses, sorry. The recreation and marine departments are on the part of the building that's closest to the atrium, but then beyond that is storage space and a meeting room. In this plan, you can see that right here is a public restroom wing. So on this lower level, there's a terrace that's contiguous with this terrace that provides entrance to the building. And it also leads to this public restroom, which can be operated completely independent of Town Hall. So if visitors to Plymouth are looking for a restroom, they can use this even if Town Hall is closed. It can be separately operated. On the second floor, which is where the main entrance is at the top of the hill, we have a large meeting space immediately adjacent to that entrance. That meeting space also can be utilized after hours, so if there's a meeting at a time when all of Town Hall doesn't need to be open, there's an opportunity to come into the main entrance and go directly into that meeting room. We located near this main entrance those departments that will be most actively used and that people will visit the most often. So on this main level from the top of the building are the treasurer and collector, the procurement department, and the tax assessor. And then, of course, on this level is the main courtroom with a multi-function meeting room across the hall. On the third floor of the building, the third floor is only in the new construction because the second floor of the courthouse is the top floor. So on the third floor, we have the Department of Building Inspections, Planning, Health, and Finance. And then on the very top floor of the new addition, which is the fourth floor, is the engineering department, town manager, another meeting room that can be used by multiple departments, and human resources. Each of the floor plans is, of course, oriented and arranged around a central corridor. On this top floor, that central corridor could terminate in this public roof terrace, if that option was selected. If not, that corridor would terminate at the egress stair, and these two departments would sort of wrap around that end of the building. So the floor plan works either way. The basement has, there's a full basement under the new construction, which, I'm sorry, I misspoke earlier. I said that mechanical and storage were on the first floor. They're actually here in the basement. But this is the basement under the new construction, which has storage space, mechanical space, and some locker rooms for town hall employees. We thought it was a good idea, it was suggested to us, and it was a good idea to cut a section through the building because the hill plays such an important role in the way this building is designed that this really portrays some of the things that I was referring to in terms of the floor plan and the renderings. So at the lowest portion of the hill, of course, we have the beautiful historic courthouse. Then just behind that is our two-story atrium, which would have a stair connecting the two levels, but it's also a two-story space with a bridge going across. And then behind that is the new construction, which, as you can see, has its main level on the second floor connecting to the courthouse. And that's the point at which one comes out at the top of the hill, at the top of South Russell Street. So you can really start to see how the new construction works with the old construction with a connector in between. In terms of the site design for the proposed new building, this is the existing site plan. Again, of course, the 1820 Courthouse, the Commissioner's Building, the DPW building. There's an existing parking lot at the base of Burial Hill, and there's some parking sort of spread around the DPW building, as well as some on-street parking. We looked at two different scenarios for the site plan. We felt there were two ways to sort of complement our building and try to maximize parking to the greatest extent possible. We're very aware that parking is a very important consideration, that parking is a problem in Plymouth currently, and that we needed to maximize parking to the greatest extent that we could within the courthouse corridor. So with the help of VHB, really, they were the primary drivers of how we would develop these site plans and parking layouts. With their tremendous help, we developed two different options for the site overall. The first one keeps the road configurations the way they are. We're incorporating a small parking lot immediately adjacent to the new entrance to Town Hall, and that parking lot would of course contain accessible parking spaces for those who need accessible spaces. I haven't talked about it before, but we're retaining the 3 historic houses, the 3 residential projects that exist within the courthouse corridor, because we think they're an important sort of part of the context of this whole project. Behind those, where the DPW building would be, is some additional parking, as well as parking sort of above the street. And we slightly reconfigured the parking lot on Burial Hill to make it more efficient. But essentially, the parking is maximized with respect to what's there now without any significant changes. We would also be utilizing all of the, maintaining, preserving all of the on-street parking that exists there already. The other site plan that we looked at involves a bit of reconfiguring of the roadway. So in this plan, we have slightly shifted this road from not being aligned with the existing street. We've slightly shifted it downhill. And the reason we wanted to study this scenario, there are a few reasons. One is that it takes some of the parking away from being immediately adjacent to the historic residences. So whereas the previous scheme had this parking, which is below the residences, as well as a fairly sizable lot immediately above the residences, in this scheme, because the road gets relocated, most of the parking gets moved up the hill, which we thought was somewhat better for those houses. The other advantage is that it more clearly defines the circulation pattern, and it creates a more efficient parking layout on the uphill side of the relocated street. So these options are both kind of on the table. They both can be the subject of further conversation and further study. But it's essentially 2 different approaches to the site design, both intended to maximize parking as much as possible. So the summary of the parking counts is as follows. At Lincoln Street, the current number of spaces that are dedicated to Town Hall are 49. And the existing number of Town Hall employees is 97. So that you can see we have approximately half as many spaces as employees. The projected number of Town Hall employees is 123. In the 1820 Courthouse corridor, the existing number of parking spaces is 173. With the 2 options that I just presented, option 1, which keeps the streets where they are, we can achieve 169 spaces. And option B is 179 spaces. So the second one, with the reconfiguration of the road, does enable us to get a little bit more efficiency and 10 more parking spaces. I will say that in reconfiguring some of the existing parking lots to meet current code regulations, we did actually lose a few, but we were able to gain parking spaces back through that reconfiguration. And when we proceed to the question and answer period, if there are questions with respect to parking and site design and traffic analysis, John's here to respond to those questions. Excuse me. So finally, I'm sure you're all wondering, what does this cost? So I have here a summary of the project costs, but I know that David Peck is going to go into this in more detail. So I will present our summary and then he'll elaborate. To renovate the 1820 courthouse, the historic portion of this project, that cost is about $4.2 million. The new addition is approximately $20 million to construct the new addition attached to the historic building. The optional roof terrace is approximately $255,000. The optional green roof is $43,000. And both site plans ended up being approximately the same cost. Some have more landscaping costs, some have more road construction costs. But either one added about $3 million to the total project cost. We have soft costs added to that, which is approximately $7.668 million for a total project cost of $35 million, plus or minus. So with that concludes my portion of the presentation. I'll be very happy to answer questions, but I think we probably proceed through the other speakers first, or would you like me to? Thank you. David, I'll bring up your slide. It's there. One more. So this is an upgrading that, so if you want to use that to change the slides, or do you want Cecilia to do it?
I think if Cecilia does it,
Okay.
and wherever the pointer is.
If you advance this,
Okay.
if you advance this
Yeah.
with the space bar, she'll advance
All right.
the screen.
Okay, great. Thank you very much. David Peck, Chairman of the Building Committee, and also a member of the 1820 Courthouse Planning Committee. When we saw the summary capital budget that Martha shared with you, I wanted, on behalf of the Building Committee and the town, to see the detail. And there was a 20-page detailed cost estimate for the project that I wanted to sort of deconstruct and be able to share with you all the pieces and assumptions that have gone into this very early budget. And there's a couple other slides I'll share with you as well. But to get to that $35 million budget, which you saw, the pieces include what the project would cost right now in 2013 for the new portion of the construction. I separately priced and broke out the costs of the public restrooms, which was an addition that the committee requested, but is technically not related to the purposes of the new town hall. So there's total new construction with only 61,000 square feet. If you recall, Martha shared that the calculated square footage was 67 to actually 70,000 square feet. The renovations with the demolitions we would have would only be 12,000 square feet in the old courthouse. Site work up on a little over about 3¼ acres was another 2013 cost of $2.4 million, adding up to right now that project for everything we saw today, not counting the fees, is potentially as little as $22 million. But this is very early. So the nature of conceptual planning, and at this point I'd like to thank our professionals, Ted Gentry Associates and Pomeroy Associates, who's doing the peer review with them. And also, this is in the detail, that we included in the planning something called design contingency. And a design contingency is that when you're this early in a project, there's a lot of things that are not yet on the drawings. These are very conceptual drawings, and it could be, the doors, and it could be the systems. And so at this point, you always add a percentage to fill in the details that are likely between the conceptual design and the final drawing. So we've added to the current estimate almost 15% of design contingencies. The next thing is escalation. This project, even if it's to be reviewed and approved at spring town meeting, will then take another 6 months or more to design. I haven't asked you the exact amount. And then a year or more to construct. So we need to escalate the estimated 2013 costs to 2015 or 16 at the earliest. So again, our cost estimators have included an escalation factor of 7%. It was very low. In the past couple of years, it's escalating. We need to be cautious in that estimate. The next contingency that's included within this overall budget is something called a scope contingency. And that is, as you finish the design and even in you're in construction, you may add, components, might be a new code required fire alarm improvement or a structural code improvement, or even adding a department or subtracting a department. Scope might change during the life of a project. And finally, a construction contingency of 3%. So, and that's if you discover ledge, or there's a bad soil, or there's something else that happens that was unanticipated, perhaps an escalation or some products no longer available. But you add up all those contingencies, and what is now a 2013 project of $22 million could potentially, as a building, be another. These are the costs per square foot. you're already up to 40, 60, maybe you're almost up to $400 a square foot for the building. We've included the two add alternates of the roof terrace and the green roof. And then with all of it said and done with this likely project, we need to have our fees and our soft costs, our project manager, furniture, equipment. And so that, again, deconstructing the earlier budget, that's 20% after we've applied the earlier contingencies. So that means we're adding up to our same $35 million for the project. But that's because of the cautious contingencies that are included at this point of the project. And it's also worth pointing out it's $35 million, including the approximately $300,000 for the two add alternates, and it's including over $400,000 for the public restrooms that would not necessarily be part of a town hall or planned elsewhere, which we'll look at in a minute. But if you add up the 2013 value of the construction, it's $300 per square foot plus about $40 of the likely design contingency, or $340 a square foot. So we'll go to our next slide. And okay, but these are in a slightly different order than I anticipated, sorry. I also wanted, because both as a citizen and as a building committee, the question would be asked, what would this municipal center cost outside of town if it were not in this location? We need to give it a reality test. And so using the same costs per square foot, the building actually becomes a little bit smaller instead of the new construction and the renovated courthouse. So I'm using 67,000 square feet. So the building is actually a little bit cheaper. If you recall, it's around 22 or 23 million. It's 21 million for a new building. But we apply the same contingencies: design contingencies, escalation, scope contingency, construction contingency, and our soft costs that the building, including, and then I should back up and say the site work, we estimate would need to be a larger site. The downtown has the advantage of the streets, South and North Russell Street, and a good bit of the infrastructure. If we are outside of town, it is my estimate that we would need 5 acres of land instead of 3 1/4 or 3 1/2. So we have 5 acres of land to potentially develop, so it's a little more expensive on the site development. So we're at $33 million potentially for this same building, or a very similar program building outside of town. However, we don't have 5 acres that we know of in the right place, so we've added to that the cost of acquiring 5 acres of land, just an estimate at about $250,000 an acre, and lo and behold, the outside of town location is $34.3 million, and if you recall, that's virtually identical to the cost, the downtown cost, with no roof terrace, no green roof, and no the public bathrooms. So the conclusion that we have is essentially identical outside of town or inside of town at this point, looking at it, which means there is no premium. The town would not be paying a premium to be in the downtown location. We can look at the next slide. Comps, I wanted to compare with other municipal buildings that we're aware of. Again, I was helped on this by several of our professionals. And we looked at everything from, we have Westford, Cambridge, Upton, Bridgewater, some of which are completed, some of which were designed in different years. So we needed to apply an escalation factor to them. But if we look at, we have anywhere from $339 a square foot. One was as high as $525. We see $371, $340, $348. And our project, if you remember, is sitting at $340. So by way of defending or reality testing the value that our professionals have put together, we're right where we need to be, or we're consistent with comparable municipal buildings. And finally, what I wanted to show is that this town's building committee takes very seriously living within the budgets that are put together. So I looked across our past records for the last, since 2005, And if we look at all the projects that this building committee has been given, we have lived within the budget and sometimes lived substantially within the budget. So from the crematorium to PCIS HVAC, if you look across here, we have been under budget sometimes by a small amount, sometimes by a significant amount. Some of the school projects, we've applied for rebates from NSTAR and received rebates. But in average, across the project since 2005, we have lived 10% under the budget the town has given us and the town meeting has approved. So I would pledge, you can, past performance is no promise of future performance, but the building committee will take very seriously living within the budget, and the $35 million that's been estimated by our professionals is in fact safe and is not an underestimate. We believe we can safely live within that and deliver a great town hall. And with that, I'll turn it on to our next speaker. And we'll save questions for later on. Thank you.
Next, we'd like to bring up Lynn Barrett, the Finance Director, and she'll be followed by Mark Garrett. They're going to speak a little bit about not just the overall cost, which you just heard about, but exactly how it will affect all of you and what that impact will be. So we'll go into that series now.
Good evening, I'm Lynn Babb, Director of Finance. I was asked to put together the financing part of this project, sort of an analysis of how this would fit within Plymouth's financial framework and budget. So I'll walk you through the slides. The estimated cost of the project and its funding sources. The feasibility estimate of $35 million prepared by the architects, and our possible funding sources would be primarily for the historic structure piece of the project. We would seek CPA funding through the CPC committee. Also, we would look at sale of town-owned real estate. We have a number of buildings or structures that are either for sale or potentially could go for sale in the future to help fund this project. And then also any economic development funds that could be available either through some of our local economic development agencies, PGDC, Visitors Service Bureau, those types of outlets. We would seek funding from those outlets. And then whatever was remaining of the cost of the project would then be borrowed through the town of Plymouth, authorized at town meeting. This possible borrowing could be anywhere from $25 to $30 million, depending on the other funding sources that we were successful at seeking for the project. This slide right here just identifies the Massachusetts state statute that we would borrow the funds under and the enabling legislation that the options that we would have for this borrowing. It's Massachusetts Chapter 44, Section 7.3 and or 7.3a. And basically, these two statutes will allow you to acquire land, construct buildings, or additions to buildings, including original equipment and furnishings. Also, it includes remodeling, reconstructing, or making extraordinary repairs, including original equipment, landscaping, paving, and other site improvements, incidental or directly related to the remodeling project. We can borrow up to a maximum of 30 years for this project, and also there is an option of either doing a level debt payment or an equal principal amortization. And what I mean by that is a level debt payment is similar to your home mortgage. You take a mortgage out on your home for 30 years, the amount that you pay in principal and interest, or the amount of your mortgage payment every month is the same dollar amount over that 30-year period. The second option for us is to do an equal principal amortization. And this is the option that Plymouth has done historically. It is a more lesser expensive option. What happens with equal principal amortization is if you were to build a building for $10 million and you're going to borrow over a 10-year period, the principal amount for each payment each year would be $1 million. The 10 million divided by 10. And then the interest cost based on that note, in the first year, the interest cost would be based on whatever the outstanding principal is at that time. So the outstanding principal would be 10 million. So the interest would be applied to that. And then each year, as you pay down the principal, the interest would get applied to a smaller amount of the principal. So what happens over that 10-year period is your payment decreases. So it's higher at the beginning, but then it starts to go down. And I'll be able to demonstrate this in a future slide. But this is historically what the town of Plymouth has done because it costs us less in the long run to finance it that way, especially for the taxpayers. The annual effect on the budget for this particular project, for this borrowing. The assumptions I have made for this presentation, and I'd like to stress that these are assumptions because we're trying to predict what would happen in the future with regards to how much this project would be, how much we would end up actually borrowing based on those other potential funding sources that we could find. Also, we're making an assumption on how long we would amortize this debt over. I mean, to take a phrase from last night, I don't like to kick the can down the road. So historically, the town of Plymouth has always tried to borrow, anytime we borrow money for a project, we try to amortize it in the least amount of years that we possibly can afford. And similar to the Plymouth North High School project that we just built, we are borrowing for that project over a 25-year period. All of our other building projects that we've done in the past, we've borrowed over a 20-year period. So my recommendation for this particular project would be to do something similar that we did for Plymouth North, 25 years, and not go out that maximum of 30 years. What ends up happening is the longer that you go out, the more interest you're going to pay on the project. The other estimate assumption that's in this presentation is a 5% average annual coupon rate, which is the interest rate that we would pay on this project. The approximate date of long-term borrowing for this project, because it would really depend on the construction stage as to the design, construction, and all that. We would require to work with the owner's project manager to get cash flow statements as to when we should borrow the money. But based on the timeline, if this were to go to town meeting in the spring, and then we would authorize it, the approximate long-term borrowing of this project would probably happen sometime in May of 2017. Right now, we're on a cycle in the finance department of borrowing long-term for projects once every 2 years. We try to spread it out like that because we do have a lot of activity in the town of Plymouth with the various projects, especially with the building projects. And we don't like to go out to market every year because there is a cost of borrowing and cost of market analysis that has to be done. So we do once every 2 years, and then in the off years, we borrow on a short-term basis. So I'm just trying to explain all the different assumptions that I'm putting into the numbers that you're going to see. I'm also assuming at most that we would borrow approximately $30 million for this portion of the project that would be funded through the general fund. Because of the portion of the project that is historic in nature, we could possibly get CPA funding and then any other funding sources for maybe the public bathrooms or other areas in the building. So for presentation purposes, the borrowing is based on $30 million. And based on the assumptions above, the 25 years, the 5% interest rate, borrowing in May of 2017, the first year of debt service on the budget would be $2.7 million, and that includes principal and interest. And then you would borrow over the 25 years, and each year that principal would stay the same, but the interest rate, the interest calculated on the principal would decrease every year based on the principal that's outstanding. So then in year 25, the principal and interest payment would be a total of $1.3 million. This project potentially could be cost shared with CPA funding or even some other sources, but for purposes of this presentation, I just wanted to show you what borrowing of the $5 million portion would be if we were to borrow $5 million with authorization from town meeting and the CPC committee. The same assumptions would be used for the 25 years and the 5% coupon rate. So in the first year of the debt service would be $450,000 for principal and interest, and then that would decrease to $210,000 for principal and interest in year 25. And then just for your edification, in year one, the $450,000 represents approximately 20% of the annual CPA revenues that the CPA fund incurs. So it's slightly more than the 10% that we're required to either set aside or spend on historic resources, but the 20% would be affordable within the CPA fund. The big question that has been raised internally with the committee and with myself and the town manager is, would this project be financed within the levy limit or outside of the levy limit through a debt exclusion? So that's something that needs to be considered, needs to be thought out from town staff and from feedback from the public and most town meeting members. I see a lot here tonight. So it's something that if you were to do it within the levy limit, obviously it would use some of our excess levy capacity that we have, and then it would last for that 25-year period. And that just requires a town meeting vote. The other option is to do a debt exclusion, similar to what the town did for the Plymouth North High School, South High School, and Senior Center projects, where you would require a vote at town meeting, but then also a ballot vote from the public. And that would be that calculation is over and above your levy limit, so you would still have whatever excess levy capacity you would have underneath. I calculated what this would look like potentially for the average homeowner, what the tax effect would be for the average homeowner. So no matter what, even if it's within the levy limit or if it's a debt exclusion, it would still be an increase in the taxes. So for example, using the assumptions that we used before, over the 25-year equal principal assumption, in year one of the project, for this $30 million project, the average homeowner would see an increase of $94.15. In year 25, because the principal and interest, the interest decreases over the 25-year period, in year 25, the approximate cost would be $43.93. Those numbers are based on assumptions that we'd be borrowing $30 million. The home values that I used to calculate those costs is the 2013 valuation of the town of Plymouth. Every year, when we go to set our tax rate, we also have to set our overall values for the town. So we're currently right now setting a tax rate for 2014. We'll probably do that sometime the end of November, the beginning of November, but we have not yet determined or gotten our values approved by the Department of Revenue. So for purposes of this presentation, we use the 2013 value of the town, the assessed valuation, and that was $8.6 billion. We also used the average home cost for 2013, and that the average is based on all of the different homes in Plymouth. The average for 2013 is a home of $300,298. So using those figures, this particular project, the year one debt and principal and interest payment of $2.7 million, when you put it into the tax calculator using the 8.6 million in value and the average home of $300,298. In year one, the cost again would be $94.15, and it equates out to approximately 31 cents per $1,000 of value. So if you had a home of $400,000, then you would multiply 400 times the 31 cents to get the approximate value of what that would mean to your home. So it's approximately 31 cents per 1,000 of value. This slide right here represents the cost to that average homeowner for just this particular project, using all of the assumptions that we just discussed before, going out over the next 10-year period. And basically what this shows is in the first couple of years, because we would go to town meeting in the spring of 2014 and authorize a borrowing of up to $30 million for the project, we wouldn't actually incur any interest costs for that project in 2015, because we wouldn't start borrowing the money until 2015 for design, and then near the end of the year, maybe start construction. So we would incur a short-term interest cost in 2016, and these are just estimates based on some experience that we've had with other cash flows with projects. So we would borrow a certain amount of money for design and or beginning of construction in 2015. We would pay that interest in 2016, and then that amount would grow into the following year because the project is nearing completion. So it would be an interest payment again in 2017. So the cost to the homeowner, you would see for this particular average homeowner of $300,000 in 2016, a cost of almost, maybe around $18, and then in 2017, it would go up to about, $52 or so. And then in 2018 is when you would see the first year of the principal and interest payment of that $2.7 million, which would cost that homeowner $94. And then each year after that, it starts to go down. And this slide just shows the same assumptions, but that particular cost per 1,000 of value. So this is the, in year 2018, when it's approximately 31 cents per thousand, and these would be the cost for the short-term interest, and then going out those years. So it slightly decreases each year as you go out. So it's like 31 cents, 30.5 cents, 30 cents. It goes out each year. And you would multiply that particular amount by the value, average value. And again, these are estimates. So every year we do have new values we calculate an average home. You know, over the last 5 years, the town's values have gone from almost 10 billion down to this 8.6 billion. I predict that last year, when we set our tax rate in 2013, the values did decrease from 2012, but I suspect that when we finish our values this year, that they'll slightly increase because we use sales from the prior 2 years, so it would be sales from 2012, and things started to uptick at that point. So we'll probably see a slight increase in our values, which would only bear well for this particular cost assumptions. It would decrease that cost per thousand, or that cost of that average homeowner. The other question is, you know, can we afford this? And the answer is basically yes. And then as far as the question is you know, what is the town, you know, willing to pay, so to speak. But as far as statutorily and the constraints that we have to live within with regards to our debt limits, those are dictated by the state. So Massachusetts General Laws, Chapter 44, Section 10, defines that we should never exceed 5% of the town's equalized valuation with regards to what we borrow. Our equalized valuation is approximately 10 billion. So when you calculate that out, our debt limit is 465, almost 466 million. So we would be within that threshold with what we have in existing debt, what we have been authorized at town meeting already, and then this new project. So we would be within that debt limit. Also, the other consideration that we look at is our internal financial policies. I've recommended to the town that we stay within a 6.5% to 8% carrying charge for our debt service in any particular year, and that's as a figure calculated as part of the total operating budget. We try to keep our debt service, which is principal and interest on all of our projects, within that range. It's a range that Moody's and S&P, which is the bond rating agencies, you know, say that it's manageable. It's affordability for a particular community. We could go over that. There's nothing against us going over that, but that would be like a willingness of the town to be able to do that. Because we do have the capacity, we do have the excess living capacity to be able to do that. Also, as I mentioned before, I recommend that we try to do as much as a rapid amortization with regards to how long we borrow for a project. So in consideration and looking at this, we could go out 30 years, which would decrease the annual principal and interest payment, but then it would also increase the total cost of what we finance over that 30 years. So that's why I recommend 25 years. And then another thing to consider is when you do a debt exclusion, it shows the bond rating agencies that there is definitely a willingness to pay from the community. It's something that they want to do. This particular slide right here looks very confusing, but I'm going to try to go slowly and explain what I was trying to show you here. Basically, as I mentioned, on an annual basis, when I look at the affordability of any particular project within our debt, within our operating budget guidelines, we look at what our existing debt is versus any new projects that are coming on. So when I look at this, this is the next 10-year period. This is our debt service, which I'm not sure if you can really see that column way over to the left, but basically it goes from about $5 million up to around $10 million for our existing debt service right now. So this red line right here consists of what our principal and interest payments are for all of our existing debt. And what existing debt means is these are projects that were voted and approved by town meeting, years ago, or, as far as up to almost 3 years ago, and projects that have been either completed or, substantially completed, and we've actually gone out and done long-term borrowing for these projects. So this is existing long-term principal and interest. And some of these items, some of these items include, just for, to think about it, is our Plymouth North High School. We have so far borrowed approximately $40 million for the town share of that project. So that's included in this red line. Also, what's included in here is the building of the Emergency Operations Center down at the Cedarville Fire Station. It includes the senior center that we built. It includes the crematory project. It includes some significant school HVAC projects and roof projects that we've done for PCIS, West Elementary, Indian Brook. It also includes some other school remodeling projects for doors, windows, a roof project, or a small roof project that was done at Plymouth South High School. It also includes the construction for Plymouth South Middle School and renovations and additions that were done to South Elementary and Manamet Elementary schools. These two particular items, Plymouth South, or these three items, are actually going to be paid off in 2020 and 2021. So that's why you see this, significant kind of drop-off that I explained to you. We do equal principal, but the interest decreases as the note goes out. So that's why this drops off. So then what we determined is, okay, what can we afford to add on as new projects and try to stay within this 6.5% and 8% threshold. The 6.5% threshold is this yellow line, and this pink line right here is the 8% threshold. So the blue line, this dark blue line right here, what that represents is projects that town meeting has authorized. For example, Plymouth South High School is authorized. We haven't built it yet, but it's in the feasibility stage. So we've authorized that project. Estimated in here that the cost of that project to the town could possibly be around $50 million. So I have included in here, using some of the assumptions that I used earlier for the 1820 project, for all of these authorized projects, because we haven't actually gone out to market and done long-term borrowing yet, because either we haven't completed the project, haven't started it yet, but the projects are authorized. So in this dark blue line is Plymouth South High School for $50 million, Plymouth North High School for completion, because we still have to just finish up borrowing the town share of the project. Water Street Culvert and Bridge project, which hasn't started yet, but it's in design phase. Plymouth South Middle School building repair project. You've seen the facade of that building repair. Some fire truck equipment that's been previously authorized at town meeting and actually has been ordered and received. Beach property that was just authorized last spring for $305,000, and then federal furnace HVAC project for $7.15 million. So as David mentioned earlier, I mean, these are authorized projects. For example, the federal furnace project, we authorized $7.15 million, but right now it's in the design phase. It's supposed to go out to bid, I believe, the end of this year. So we'll know basically how much the construction is going to be for that project. And we only borrow what we need. We won't borrow the whole $7.5 million. So hopefully we'll see the same type of savings that we've seen in maybe some of the other projects that mentioned. And what happens when we have those savings is we go back to town meeting and we rescind that borrowing because we don't actually borrow it. So ultimately, we'll come back to town meeting and you'll see an article to reduce those authorizations. But that's what's in the dark blue line, is all of those projects. And then what's included in this, the light blue line right here, is the 1820 Courthouse project that we've been talking about tonight. And then it also includes some other projects that have been discussed and been on the 5-year capital plan that's submitted to finance every year. So I sort of looked at that and said, okay, what are some of the other projects that may be under consideration for town meeting come the spring or in future years? And some of those projects include a lot of the 2020 projects that have been discussed at some of the various meetings by the DPW director. Is a total of approximately $18 million. And those projects are spread out over a couple of years. And initially, in the first year, they're going to request to do the Water Street Promenade project. And some of the other projects in the future years would be Burial Hill, Stevens Field, signalization at Lincoln and South Street, Town Square reconstruction, East-West connector, a lot of downtown roads, upgrades and drainage. So there's a lot of other projects that are sort of have been discussed and have been on the 5-year capital plan, in addition to this project that we're considering tonight. So in going out, using those same estimates for those projects and when those would be voted at town meeting or when they would be constructed, is in this light blue line. And as you can see, it goes over this recommended sort of 8% threshold and almost goes up to it goes up to a 10% threshold, which is, it's constraining, but it's doable. We have a couple of big peaks here because of the timing of when we would actually go out and borrow any of the construction for like the 1820. We would go out and borrow in 2017, so principal and interest would hit in 2018. So that's why you see a peak here, and then also is included some of these other projects that I referred to. And then because the project would take, or because the addition of some other the other 2020 projects would come on in the next 2 years when we go out to borrow in 2019, that's why you see another peak here in 2020. And what's happened sometimes in the past, in the years where we've seen these peaks of our debt service, is we've done at town meeting, we've tried to pay for some of those peaks to try to offset any increase in taxes out of the stabilization fund or out of overlay surplus. So there's potentially some options down the road to maybe help offset those peaks. But basically, this is sort of where the 1820 project would fit into the overall scenario of our debt service budget. What this slide shows you is all of the projects that we just were talking about in the previous slide, and what those are, what that cost is to the average homeowner based on the same assumptions that I mentioned earlier, the 2013 values of the $8.6 billion and the $300,000 home. So for the existing debt, those projects that we're borrowing for right now, in the red area, that's what the cost for that particular average homeowner is paying in that tax bill. So in 2015, it's approximately $362, and then it goes down over the 10-year period to $178. And then the dark blue line would be the authorized projects, Plymouth South High School, some of those other projects I mentioned. And that would be the cost of borrowing for those particular projects. So in the first year, there's some short-term interest, that kind of thing. So it would be 31, go to 66, go to 90, and then when we potentially do our first big borrowing in 2017 for Plymouth South High School, you'll start to see that on the tax rate. So that would be the jump up to $141. And then it would start to go down because of the interest going down. But then the following year, because we borrow again for the rest of the project, that's when you would see it go up, the 212, and then it would start to go down. And then the 1820 project with the other 2020 projects is the light blue line, and what that particular cost would be for that average homeowner in those particular years. So because we were borrowing 2017 for that project, that's when you see, for that project and some of those other projects, you would see that go up to $154. And then some of the other projects in 2019, and then it would go down. And then just, the next slide just shows that per $1,000 cost value. So if you were the average homeowner, the $300,000, which was the previous slide, this is the cost per $1,000 of your value for those particular project categories. That is all I have, and I am going to introduce Mark Garrett, planning board member, to discuss the concept of the courthouse site, a planning perspective. Thank you.
Well, that was pretty heady. I'm going to try to lighten it up a little bit, not so much because I think that the information that was given was not valuable, it was incredibly valuable. But I'm going to speak in terms of the planning process, the generic planning process that takes place on any project. Projects, capital projects, they are the necessities of a rapidly growing historic rural community. It's what we have to live with. And what we have to do as planners, and I am not speaking as a member of the planning board, I'm speaking to you tonight as a planner, a land use consultant. What we have to do is we have to not only look at the costs of what projects mean, but the benefit gleaned from the investment. I'm not here to tell you how you should decide on this project. What I think I'm here doing, and I think what the committee's trying to do, is get you the information as the citizenry, as town meeting members, as town officials, to enter into the discussion that's going to take place over the next few months to determine whether this is a worthwhile endeavor or not. So tonight is fact-finding for you folks and fact-finding for anybody who views this, whether it be on TV or on feedback on video. Being the fifth or sixth speaker in line, a lot of the things that I had planned to say have already been covered, and I'm not going to choose to reiterate them. Melissa spoke and summarized early on about the courthouse and the commissioner's building and how, when we obtained them, why we obtained them. And there was a point that I think we didn't make and I think should be made. I think part of the discussion that took place way back in 2009 was that the town, one of the reasons, one of the objectives the town purchased this property was to have control over the development of a destination use. A destination use that would support our downtown businesses who had just lost a destination use. The county courthouse, a building that had people coming and going, professionals, non-professionals, litigants, you name it. They were all there. They were all in the geographic center of our downtown, in a building that is rather majestic looking, rather old, deteriorating, but nonetheless, when you walk by on the street, it is a majestic looking building. I think one of the things we have to understand too was that in 2012, with the help of PGDC, I believe it was a $5,000 figure, the Urban Institute was brought down to evaluate the courthouse corridor, and they drew several conclusions and recommended that the two most feasible uses were high-density residential development or the development of a municipal complex. The latter being very similar to the commentary by the late Reverend Dr. Peter Gomes, who spoke of this back in 2004, and the letter was mentioned and is available, the letter to the editor. Regardless of what has happened, regardless of the debate as to the appropriateness of owning the courthouse, having purchased the courthouse, guess what? We bought it, we own it, and it remains vacant for a myriad of unanticipated reasons. Coupled with this, we have a town office building at 11 Lincoln Street, which Martha spoke of many of its deficiencies and substandard conditions to operate a town of our size. But a couple of facts. The building was built in 1892. It was transformed in 1953 into a 28,000 plus or minus square foot town office building that serviced a population of 13,500 people. In 1998, the building was retrofitted at a cost of $2.2 million, increasing the usable square footage to 40,000 square feet. At that time, it was servicing a population of 48,000 people. That same footprint in 2013 now services a population of near or over 60,000. I haven't counted lately, but in 2010 it was north of 59,000. And over the course of time, dating back to ISO records as early as 1949, 11 Lincoln Street has been utilized for many different purposes, school and town offices, and in the Plymouth compacts and facility master plans from 1949 through 2006, 11 Lincoln Street was deemed deficient in providing those services. Yet, we still use it. I would say a damn good building that is being overly utilized. Martha also referenced that currently, during the school year, 3 times a day, 5 times a week, Lincoln Street is the presence of traffic problems, some of them major, some of them very major. Depending on the day, the traffic may be worse, maybe not as bad. However, the municipal emergency managers of this town have deemed that area unsafe due to traffic caused by the Nathaniel Morton School 3 times a day, morning, kindergarten in the midday, and afternoon, arrival and departure. And a town office building with limited parking that entertains now close to 60,000 people potentially doing the business that they have to do, whether it be getting permits, whether it be getting licenses, whether it be paying taxes, whether it be visiting the Department of Planning or the building inspector to do the business of their lives. There's a problem down there. It's too small, it's too congested. Martha spoke of the feasibility study that took place, and a feasibility study which looked at one of the recommended uses of the Urban Institute and the recommended use of Dr. Gomes, and found it to be a feasible use in the area. A new town hall of added square footage, added parking to better service the 60,000 people of today, and a population that is projected to grow over 84,000 in 2030. And what's interesting is that what has been recommended as feasible by Durkee Brown meets one of the major objectives that town meeting supported purchasing the courthouse in the first place. That being the ability to control the development of a destination use to support our downtown businesses. Kind of went through these kind of quickly, but I'm on my last slide right now. I want to leave you folks with considerations for proceeding on this subject. And it's the intent of the 1820 Courthouse Committee not to have decided what we're going to do with the courthouse, but to look at a potential alternative use for a building to be a destination use in our downtown. And our objective here is simple: to give you the facts so that you can mull them over and make the decisions yourself and enter into the discussion and the debate, which we hope is going to take place over the next several months. To us, this is the end of the first phase of the committee's work. It's the beginning of the second phase, the actual discussion and debate. And then we will enter into the third phase. Come town meeting, when we actually deliberate, we have to make a decision. So, we're asking not to have you make knee-jerk reactions on what you hear or what you read or what you were told. Soak in the information and understand it. And by no means do we think that the cost is not an issue. It is a major issue. We understand that. But planning is based on cost and benefit. It is a cost-benefit analysis. We all do planning in our everyday lives. The first consideration is the town owns this large centrally located property in our downtown that needs to support a destination use that works. The site has not been attractive to the private sector and will continue to cost the town money to maintain what is now a vacant and deteriorating structure. Currently, 11 Lincoln Street is inadequate as a town hall facility and will need to be replaced sooner rather than later. Sooner or later, at a commensurate or greater cost than the 30 plus million, the 35, the 34 million, whatever the number ultimately is, of the courthouse alternative. David Peck basically showed us that it was a wash whether we did it here or we did it elsewhere. The reuse of the courthouse for a new town hall responds to several outstanding documented needs. It allows the town to have control over the destination uses I mentioned. It allows the town to restore and protect the historic facade and other features of the building. It allows the town to fulfill the need to expand town hall as the town continues to expand around it. And this this expansion will take place if this alternative is supported on an already owned town site. Concerns have been voiced, why expend these monies now? We will need to spend a minimum of 30 to 35 million now or later to meet the long-standing need for an expanded town hall. I mentioned the population of the town is projected to grow to 73,500 in 2020 and 84,000 in 2030. The question I want to leave you in closing is, can 11 Lincoln Street continue to function effectively as our town hall, given its previously reported inadequacies, and as Plymouth continues to grow? I believe I'm turning the microphone over to John Moody from Advisory and Finance to discuss FinCom's evaluation of the cost structure.
Thanks, Mark. I'll be very brief. First, I think it's important for you to recognize I am not speaking on behalf of the Advisory and Finance Committee. The committee has not yet heard this question. They probably won't until the article comes before us, before Springtown meeting for an appropriation. So I want to talk about a couple of items. One is I would like to talk about that spike that Lynn Barrett showed us, that 2018 to 2020 spike. It's important for us to recognize that the courthouse itself, the courthouse project, is only a very small portion of that spike. And you might ask, how small a portion of that spike is it? Well, the existing debt in already authorized projects constitutes 74% of that total spike in 2020. The additional projects, those that have or are in the pipeline, excluding the courthouse, bump that up to 86% of that spike. So the courthouse itself represents only the top 14% of that 2020 spike. So it's important for us to recognize that there are a lot of elements that are driving that spike, and it's just not about the courthouse. I think the second thing I want to talk about, this one gets a little tricky, because when you start talking about tax rates and the average single-family dwelling tax bill, and you try to project that out over the next 5 years or 10 years, the farther up you go, the less likely you're going to be even reasonably accurate. But one of the things that I've done is I've taken some of the numbers that Lynn looked at, because I wanted to understand this from a taxpayer perspective. What is really the impact to the taxpayer? So we can, it's easy for us to understand that, you know, currently our debt service is at $413 a year per taxpayer. Then it's going to spike in 2020 to $670 per taxpayer. And that in 10 years, out into 2025, that spike is going to drop back down to be $508 per taxpayer, roughly speaking. So what I tried to do was incorporate that with a modest assumption of an operating budget increase over that 10-year period. While I don't want to say what an average single-family dwelling tax bill would be out in 2025, because I think that would be irresponsible, what I do want to suggest to you is that when you look at that full 10-year period, and you account for operating budget increases, and you account for all the project costs, that what you're looking at is an average annual tax increase over that 10-year period of about 3%. And that's a very interesting number, because even though we're undertaking all of this extra work that we haven't done in a great many years, A lot of it is deferred maintenance that we should have undertaken years ago. Even though we're taking on this heavy burden of projects over the next 5 to 6 years, that 3% figure is roughly the same figure that you would see as an annualized tax increase over the past 5, 10, 15 years. So the tax increase that the taxpayers are going to experience doesn't move a whole lot from what we have historically seen already. And I think that's the key point I wanted to put in front of you, that this doesn't upset the apple cart for us as taxpayers. The tax increase, when it's annualized, is about the same as it has been for the past 10, 15, 20 years. With that, I'll pass this over to Donna Kerr, who will talk about the long-term perspective for the courthouse.
I've been a member of the 1820 feasibility study review team, but I'm speaking to you tonight in a private capacity as a preservationist in my role as the director of the Plymouth Antiquarian Society, and most particularly as a Plymouth resident and homeowner and taxpayer. I believe that all of the nuts and bolts and facts and figures that we've received tonight tell us very clearly that we are at a crossroads. We are at an important moment of decision that's going to impact this community for generations to come and perhaps the next century. And the pivot on which our future rests is the proposal that was just presented to you tonight. And this proposal comes in response to two critical issues that confront us right now, that are going to need to be addressed, and are simply not going to go away until we come up with solutions and enact them. And these are, as we've been hearing tonight, the inadequacy of our current town hall and the need to invest in a new, functional, and accessible government center. Second, there's the gaping hole that has scarred the heart of our historic downtown since 2005, when the county court, a civic presence that had been there in place for 285 years, vacated their historic premises. Now, the only chance that we have to resolve both of these challenging dilemmas in one project, one well-designed, high-quality project, is tonight's proposal to convert the 1820 courthouse into a new government center. Really, it's the ultimate two-for-one deal. And if we don't pursue this opportunity, these two very complicated dilemmas will be pulled apart, and they are each going to absorb time and resources in order to find a separate solution for each one. So the question we need to be asking is, do we spend more years and ultimately many more dollars trying to come up with a better plan than what we see here on the table? Or do we make a collective decision to take what's feasible and what's right here before us now and make it possible? I believe this project points a bright way forward to a good and beneficial future for Plymouth. It gives our community a vibrant and highly visible civic core, not something that we have had tucked away on the traffic-infested street of Lincoln Street. It gives us a government center in the historic center that connects all of our residents, whatever their precinct, their interests, or their origins, directly to the site of Plymouth's original settlement, to its even more ancient Native American past, to centuries of continuous experience as they come to do their business at their town hall. And in addition to the sheer power of place that's captured in this project, it also provides a model for historic preservation for the 21st century that other communities will want to come and visit and learn from. It's a beautiful, functional, state-of-the-art facility that was designed to enhance the architectural magnificence of the 1820 courthouse that was itself designed nearly 2 centuries ago to instill pride in the larger community of Plymouth County, and which would be restored to its full former glory. It's a facility that's perfectly positioned between the downtown and the waterfront. It's placed like a crown jewel for visitors along Court Street, all the highways and byways that we have in our center, even from Google Earth on above, and will serve as a magnet to draw people right into the heart of our center. This project is custom made for the scale and the character of our downtown with its mix of storefront and historic residential areas. And no private developer is going to be able to offer this level of sensitive design. Their interest is going to be profit, not public good. And seriously, do we really want a looming multi-story apartment complex casting shadows on the historic gravestones of Burial Hill? Is that the kind of Plymouth that we're going to envision for the future ahead? So we're at a crossroads. This project is our moment of generational choice. We will decide what kind of downtown and what kind of community we're going to have in the years ahead. And I have to say that Plymouth hasn't always made the right decisions in the past. For those of us with long memories, or historians in the crowd, back in 1920, we destroyed all the finger piers along the Plymouth waterfront, only to find out after they were gone what a loss that was. And in the 1960s and early 70s, we pretty much wiped out some of our oldest homes and neighborhoods in the Summer Street High Street development to, again, many later regrets. So it's important for us now to do the right thing for Plymouth. And in just a few years, attention is going to turn to Plymouth and its 400 years of history, and what as a town, not a destination, but as a community, are we going to have to show to the world. So back in 1620, a group of English families made a tough decision. They faced their fears, they crossed the ocean, they came here and created a better future for themselves and their posterity. And I think it's time for us to live up to that legacy and find the fortitude to be a model for the nation in how to preserve a community's past while embracing the future. We can build a municipal masterpiece in the heart of the historic district that captures Plymouth's unique continuity of 1620, 1820, and 2020. We can create something that we and the generations that are going to follow us can be proud of for the next century. We can take what's feasible, this project, and we can make it possible. It is our generational moment, and I think it's time for Plymouth to do the right thing. Thank you.
Thank you to everybody that's helped with this and everybody that stayed for this presentation. We know that we will need to do more outreach, but for now we'd like to take questions because that does conclude the formal part of our program. I'm not sure if that's a sign that we answered everything or...
Thank you very much. That was a great presentation by all. Thank you. I have a concern. I'm not saying that the town doesn't need a town hall, a new town hall. We obviously do. And I'm not saying the town of Plymouth, the downtown courthouse is in the right location. I'm very concerned about the parking. I know this has gone back and forth, back and forth. This town has had a parking problem in downtown Plymouth for as far back as I can remember. Here we are introducing a new use in the center of the town of Plymouth, which is a high-intensity office use. But we're only producing or creating, we're actually creating very few new spaces that already exist. I don't think if we're really trying to build an office building and town hall that we can be proud of and that will function properly, that we can do it without adding additional parking in the form of structured parking. This has to be part of this development. Right now in the town of Plymouth, on a busy summer day, you have a very difficult time finding a parking space. When we saw the photographs that were taken of the site, I noticed that the parking space, the Burial Hill parking space, was almost full. People say they don't use the parking space, but at times they do. As the town begins to grow, people begin to move into town and we have a new building going into town now that's 22 new units, housing units, which will be creating more and more parking demand in town. We're going to need that parking. We're talking about 4 years down the road before we have the office building. And what's it going to be like in 4 years? There's going to be more of a parking problem down there. We need to address the problem. PGDC has been working on this problem, the town of Plymouth has been working on this problem, and the worst thing we can do right now is put a building in the center of town of high-intensity office use without providing the right amount of parking. So I ask you to seriously consider somehow building this parking garage into the plan, structured parking into the plan, so that we can do exactly what Don said. That's something we'd be very proud of. I don't want to be going to town hall as I do now and look all around town hall to find a parking space and walk probably from Union Street up to town hall to get there. One of the situations we didn't address is we say we have 49 parking spaces at town hall, but we all know that people park on Water Street, they park on Union Street, they park on Lincoln Street, and they park at Cedars Field. You know, where are they going to park now? They're going to be fighting in downtown Plymouth to find a space. We need to address the problem. We don't want to kick it down the road. Let's address it, let's deal with it, and build it into the plan. Thank you very much.
If I could just respond to those concerns. I think that we don't disagree at all with the need for parking, and that we realize that that's a really important consideration of this project. When I presented the two site plans, the second one that I presented did have a shift in the roadway, and one of the reasons for pursuing that scheme is, we don't have the, thank you. One of the reasons for pursuing that scheme is that on the uphill side of the shifted road, there's the opportunity to do just what you're describing, which is to, in the future, possibly construct structured parking. Prior to shifting that road, we had several smaller lots. But one of the reasons we wanted to look into that scenario was to create a lot on one side of the street, which is a better dimension for possible future construction of structured parking at the top of the site. So I think you bring up a good point, and we've tried to give it some thought in the different site plans that we've developed.
Hi, I'm Richard Caproni. I'm a town meeting member from Precinct 15. Thank you for having the forum, Melissa. The town needs a new town hall. It's kind of a given. But it's still very, very not given that this is the right place, the right project with which to do this. I don't know if anybody wants to respond to the comment, and we hear this every time there's a presentation, that the site was not attractive to the private sector, because we've got to think people in the private sector might be a lot smarter than the people in this room. All right, and does anybody want to take that one on, that the private sector did not find this site attractive for the last 10 years?
I'm not sure that we can fully answer that. I mean, certainly we can ask people from the Redevelopment Authority about the outreach they have done in the last few years while they've had the lease, if we have somebody that can speak to that. But it's something we can discuss in committee. But an actual bid never went out for a private developer. It was more exploration that was just done, I think, locally.
But unfulfilled exploration. Okay, then on town meeting vote for the funding, is that going to be a majority vote or a 2/3 vote?
2/3? 2/3 vote.
So this project is at the peril of 45 town meeting members out of the 135, is that correct?
It would require 2/3.
Yeah. If you really want it, you're going to have to reach out to 90 or 91 of the town meeting members. I would recommend that you do that. The only other thing is, if this fails, is there a plan B, Melissa, for a new town hall?
There is not a plan B for a new town hall. More importantly, there is not a plan B for what to do with the site that we own. So we would need to regroup, I think, start to discuss what are some of our other options. Certainly, the building and the site are still in the hands of the Plymouth Redevelopment Authority. They still hold the lease for the property, so they would be, forefront in the conversation about what is another option that we can do there. We know we've held it for some time now, and we need to make some plans. Even the latest issue about putting fire alarms or fire suppression systems in there is something we're concerned about.
Lastly, the presentation materials, are they going to be on the website so we can access the presentation materials?
They will be on the website. We'll try and do as much outreach as we did. We've compared this a little bit to when we made solid waste changes. We'll try and do as much outreach and get this information out as possible.
Thank you very much.
Gilbert, homeowner and taxpayer in Precinct 1, small business owner, I do believe in Precinct 3 down on Salem Street. I think Melissa just answered my question because I was going to ask, God forbid, what happens if this goes before town meeting in the spring and it says no. Because it probably is only a matter of time before, God forbid, this place catches on fire, like some of the old mills down in Rhode Island. Those are some pretty devastating fires. And I would really hate to see the situation in Plymouth like there was in Worcester, and firefighters getting killed back in that warehouse fire several years ago. I took some notes, and I really think that Mark Garrett hit the nail on the head. There's definitely some costs involved. This could be a heck of an investment. And I said I'm a business owner. And being a business owner means you have to sacrifice, you take some risk. And Mr. Kirk up there said, we made some bad decisions in the past. And you know what? Hindsight's 20/20. And whether we do the right thing by saying, hey, yeah, we're going to redevelop this, we're going to spend $35, $36 million, and we're going to have something to be proud of. And we're going to do it sooner rather than later because this plan looks awesome. And the parking and the site plan for the Plan B, I mean, I would spend more money, I would put the bathrooms in it. Plymouth 2020, we're a destination town. Let's get our tea service back. I mean, these are things that are going to add a lot of value to the town. And don't think that just the 50,000 or 60,000 of us that are here now are going to be paying for this. That tax burden, it's going to be spread among 70 or 80,000 in the future, maybe even 90 or 100,000. I mean, if we have something that's really proud and people want to come live in Plymouth, and we improve the commuter rail, and we, parking, we've got so much parking that isn't used. If we improve our shuttle bus system, we've got the parking lot up at exit 7, we've got the parking lot at exit 5. The old Walmart in North Plymouth, I was there the other day because I took the train home from Boston. There wasn't a car in the parking lot. So, we got to have to suck it up and take a risk. And if it's the right decision and the risk does pay off, it's like hitting gold.
Good evening, Ron Riley, Precinct 11, town meeting member. I thank you folks for this presentation. This is there's a lot to take in at this point. I agree with the project. I agree this is the center of our town. From when we bought the courthouse, this was my fight saying we need to own this. We can't let it go in the wrong direction. This is downtown, this is the center. I guess my first question is the courtroom. I don't know if much was stated as to what, I'm assuming it's being kept intact, and is this?
Courtroom would be restored for meeting space. For meeting space, it will be held there as ceremonial meetings, the selectmen's meeting. It would not be used. The large committee room that you saw in the back and some of the smaller ones would be used for the 40 or so active committees that we have now.
Is there any way, in the past there's been discussions and thoughts on this hosting a visitor center? Is there any way we can leave the front part of it to a visitor center and utilize the courtroom and maybe small funds, but actually have tours during the day and then have our selectmen's meetings at night, or somehow utilize and keep that as a historic place for the visitors to come to and
Right now,
a
there's
couple
probably,
dollars for you to go check it out. And, yeah.
I think it's going to be.
Offset at 35 million.
Yeah, I think it's going to be important to be able to show that feature of the historic building. So one of the things we've talked about internally, and we're certainly nowhere near that, in this stage of the process, but one of the things we talked about internally is town hall needs to do a better job of showing off our town hall, particularly if we have a location like that. So whether we do that through the senior initiative, where we have greeters that are right in that front section that then provide tours of certain areas. We've reached out recently and had somebody approach us with some very old artwork that they would like to have restored and then have displayed. This would be a perfect place to show off, do a better job of showing off our history, and I think that that would be an important component.
Thank you. Also, and again, I'm into design stage at this point. I'm probably jumping ahead, but we're showing a 5-story building being built, and Mr. Levine just spoke of the parking. When I first saw this and saw the size of it and the amount of parking spaces, they're including on-street parking, which Town Hall currently has on-street parking, and around the corner and down the street, you see the department head cars down towards the waterfront and whatnot. Would it work to have on the northerly side, as you drive up, have the basement level, have that parking garage, strictly for department heads, town vehicles? When you had the drawing up showing the whole layout, it looked as if you took the Burial Hill parking, took the center spots and you drove around. If you dropped that into the basement, you could drive around. You could pull in on your on the lower elevation, loop around, and come back out onto the Russell. What street is that? Is that Russell? And on the southerly side. So if you're driving on the exterior perimeter of the building with the parking in the center, it looks like it would take up about the center of the Burial Hill parking lot. Would limit you to 4 stories of the building, but I don't know how much space can be still squeezed. And Larry does well with this little vault that he stores everything in. He might be confused if it's too much room. But just that's a thought. As far as creating more spots, there's 20 spots in the center there approximately, and it would be strictly for, have gated or whatever for department heads. And then I'm against the exterior, without a big visitor center, against the exterior bathrooms. That's just a hangout, and the police are going to want to block it down the road. So, save your money. Thank you.
It was a great presentation, which I knew it would be. I think we have to sharpen pencil a bit more. When I was looking toward what buildings are we going to sell that are in the inventory, the surplus property in our town, what range will they bring? What price to offset the project? That should be noted. The bottom line, too, is again looking at all the capital projects in the pipeline. 35 million for the schools, 35 million for the courthouse, maybe the DPW garage, all that. Not only that, but 25 years of capital improvements that we don't know that we're going to need long down the road. So it's not just, the slide did highlight the blue graph as far as where we're going in the future, what the taxpayers are going to be looking at. But I want to know, I think a lot of people do want to know, is what's the bottom line for our taxes as far as looking at the future projects, as far as our increases, to realistically bring it to the public. I think this debate has just begun. It's not a home run here with folks. I think Bill Halsey did raise a point. The cumulative effects of all the projects we have in line, look at it realistically, bring it out. When we start reading that and speak out that the project is favorable, people have the view that they bought into it, see value, then I think we've come a long way. But the debate is just disheartening. So I look forward to going to see what happens from here and where we go. Thank you.
Yes. Good evening. My name is Roger Randall, and I'm a property owner and a taxpayer in the town of Plymouth. And I am a proponent of saving the 1820 courthouse. It is a gem, and I've spent many hours talking to friends and associates and with Peter Gomes when he was alive. Could I ask that the first slide be shown that was displayed? Well, anyhow, waiting for that slide to come up, it depicts the front of the 1820 courthouse. And if we look a little closer, we see directly across the street a yellow brick building, which I think all of you would admit is a historical spot as well. In front of that yellow brick building, there is a gray brick building, which also has its own significance. Full finish design, with a huge, big, what then was a bank building. These two properties are under private ownership, but I believe through negotiations with those owners, they could be bought. I know the prices that they paid for them were well below what we consider now as market value. The Plymouth Federal and Loan Bank, which still we call that, and the Bullfinch building, probably have 40 to 60 parking spots. The Registry of Deeds has another 20 or 30 parking spots. I'm in complete agreement that the Commissioner's building and the back part of the 1820 courthouse should be demolished and probably adjudicated to public parking. But I believe every town office could be well accommodated in those two other buildings. We would be saving 3 significant sites instead of just one. I'll leave you with that one separate thought.
I hope I can speak loud enough so everybody can hear me. I cannot understand 90% that comes over that. I would like to compliment all of you. I have great respect for all of you. I think you've done a super job. The thing that troubles me is everything is on the real estate tax of the residents of Plymouth. I have a little place in Franconia. I took my 2-car garage and built a house no bigger than that. I haven't been up there for 3 years. My kids go all the time. I think New Hampshire is eating our lunch. They've got all their liquor stores right along the Massachusetts border. They don't have any sales tax, but they have a meals tax. I don't think anybody here knows what the meals tax is in Massachusetts, right to the number. I don't think anybody knows New Hampshire, but New Hampshire is considerable because they know the people that gravitate to New Hampshire from out of state are paying for some of the activities that they do. We're paying taxes in New Hampshire and we don't care about it because it's a meals tax. You don't go out to dinner and say, oh, we're not going to go, it's going to cost us $3.25 on the meals tax. You go out for the pleasure. I wish this town would reinstitute the meals tax option and address it to paying is 100% to this project. It's something outside of what you've talked about, but I think it would be a step in the right direction to make this town understand that not everything has to be paid by the real estate tax, and do what New Hampshire does, welcome the out-of-towners to come in and enjoy themselves, because they don't care what the sales tax is. Plymouth is a great town to visit. Okay? Thank you much.
My name is Peter Curley. I'm Precinct 2 town meeting member. And my question is, have you considered any federal or state funds either available because of the nature of the building, or even a private foundation who is willing to supply funds to deal with the project?
Well, I think we're always looking at federal funding opportunities. I think one of the things or that the redevelopment authority ran up against is that there wasn't as much funding up there as may have been previously available. We have done some talk internally about private funding, things that you've heard about in other communities, such as naming rooms after somebody, depending on what the endowment is. So we have looked and talked about some of that, but not seriously enough where we've been willing to include it in any kind of funding plan.
Thank you.
Hi, good evening. My name is Nina Peters. I live at 17 South Russell Street, right behind the courthouse with my mother, who owns the home, and my husband, my 3 children, ages 2, 3, and 5. We moved there in December 2007. The courthouse had already been vacated, and I'm here tonight to learn about your intentions, but also talk about my observations and my concerns from the point of view of a corridor resident, from a mother's point of view, and a taxpayer point of view. The residential properties are considered outside the scope of this project. However, the houses sit directly in the center of the proposed footprint. Our homes and our lives are directly impacted by this project, and our quality of life will be directly affected in a negative way. Firstly, and I mean, you can imagine we're going to be living next to a multi-year construction project right outside of our door. And then, at the end of that project, we get to live in the center of a sprawling parking lot. We have 3 children. Now, I know you did a traffic study on Lincoln Street. Have you thought about the traffic study, or have you done a traffic study for how it's going to be for the 3 houses to be living in a sprawling parking lot? And what did you call it? A sea of asphalt?
We did not do a traffic study at that location.
Okay.
We did a traffic study of the existing conditions in the courthouse corridor.
Did you note that on any given day, at any given time of day, there are people making illegal right-hand turns up the street, darting across to find a parking space, and the parking lots are often, with plenty of spaces to be had?
Yep, we did know that. I don't know if you want to.
You did know that? Are you planning on making improvements to the traffic map, or? Because I didn't see that in the study.
We did note that there were observations of violations, that there was excessive speed on some of the roadways, that there is insufficient signage, there's no speed limit signs, and those things would need to be addressed.
When will they be addressed? And if it's found that it's unsafe to live there, what happens then?
Well, as part of the project, speed limit signs would be, part of those upgrades to the roadway, new sidewalks, new curbing, new crosswalks, all to make it safer, even decreasing the length of roadway that has to be crossed at sidewalks.
And from what I understand, you're talking about moving one of the streets closer to the homes. That's what a plan B or option B.
If I may, and I'm glad that you're speaking out, and I'm very interested to hear what you're saying. One of the reasons we looked at shifting that roadway was because it's getting used as a cut through now, and by shifting the roadway, the cars can't cut through as much as they can currently. And the sea of asphalt that I refer to is mostly on the uphill side of the DPW building where there are no curb lines and there's no delineation of the street. So as you suggested, people just cut across and they do it at much too great a speed. So one of the objectives here would be to offset the road so it's less of a cut through, to create more curbs and sidewalks and a better traffic pattern so those cars aren't blasting through your neighborhood in the way that they are now.
Well, people are also cutting through where we live in the Commissioner's building. They're going through that parking lot.
Right, and they won't be able to do that.
Okay. I also asked how the town is prioritizing its needs. As a mother, I wonder how you found it in the budget, or you're finding it in the budget, for $35 million for a brand new municipal building, but can't provide all-day K for our children. I spoke with Adam Blaisdell, who runs the lottery for full-day K, and he said that the primary hurdle for providing full-day kindergarten for the Plymouth children is lack of space. So you have neighboring Carver, who's taking students from Plymouth. You have Kingston. These are communities that are all providing full-day kindergarten for free.
I can't really speak to an all-day kindergarten program tonight. I mean, I know it's something that's been discussed, and I've heard space issues because it has to be in a school, has to be in a segregated area, but I couldn't really speak to it as part of this project.
Oh, well, again, I'm asking about the priorities from a mother's standpoint. I was a member of the 1820 Courthouse Consortium for 3 years, and we worked to help determine the highest and best use for the courthouse site. We considered the needs of the downtown businesses and looked for solutions that would help them to be profitable and healthy. We worked closely with the PGDC, hoping to alleviate parking shortages, and we hope the future of the courthouse site and perhaps the corridor would be a draw for visitors and residents from neighboring towns. I don't go to Hingham and go to their town hall. Just saying. We hoped it would be something extraordinary. And the town has an incredible opportunity to do something great, and it seems it's quick to squander it. I'm disappointed in the lack of creativity in this plan, although you did a beautiful job, and I'm sure you did an incredible amount of work. This is not all that we had in mind. We could have done more. I'm saddened by the narrow vision with which it's been crafted. And I hope that the residents of Plymouth demand more. Should this or any project in our backyard essentially move forward, we ask that the town include the abutters in the site planning. We've been trying for years to have meaningful discussion and bring all of the players, the stakeholders to the table. And the town has shown a little good faith. They fail to admit we are stakeholders. I'm skeptical whether the town would be thoughtful neighbors. It seems that the owners of the 3 homes up until this point have not been much more than an afterthought. And to the town, moving forward, we ask you for your consideration, and we'll hopefully have a chance to thank you for it.
Thank you.
Good evening. I want to thank everybody for their time. I just want to follow up on Nina's comments. My name is Tom Mitchell. I live at 28 Russell Street, and actually I would ask somebody to put up the site map of what you're proposing. There was another one that showed exactly, it was bigger, but basically there's 3 houses that are right in the flight path of this project. And just to reiterate, I live at 28 Russell Street. A year ago, Melissa, you came to us and you told us, do you want to participate in the project or not? And there was a discussion around possibly, having the opportunity to opt out of the project. We've heard nothing from you since.
Well, I've spoken to your attorney, and certainly I think this is a conversation we probably wouldn't want to have right here, but I've spoken to the attorney who then I found out afterwards from one of you didn't actually represent you. So we've done some outreach initially when we were first looking at this site to purchase or to consider purchase of the properties. There were also some out-of-the-box ideas that came up, like possibly purchasing, going to town meeting and asking for funds for an option to purchase.
Right.
That didn't happen. But ultimately, when the town meeting gave us the $75,000 to do feasibility, it was determined through the architectural firm that we did not need to purchase the buildings as part of an overall project.
Okay, you may not have needed it, but you didn't seem to consider our lives over the next 5 to 10 years while you do a construction project. And that's what I think Nina is really trying to underline.
Sure, and I can understand that this certainly is not a foregone conclusion at this point. I mean, this is the initial stage to see if town meeting wants us to move forward. The second phase of design would be very detailed, and I think as part of that, we would absolutely make it a point to include the neighbors and at least showing you what the schedule would be, getting your feedback and that type of issue.
Yeah, I appreciate that. I mean, we're right in the middle of this project and nobody's talked to us. So I'd ask everyone that's sitting here to put yourself in our position in one of these 3 houses, and have been very cooperative. Both Nina and myself. I'm a current member of the 1820 Courthouse Consortium. Nina did it for 3 years, and nobody's felt the need to approach us and ask us how we feel to deal with a multi-year construction project. And we would appreciate that. In fact, I think we are owed that.
Sure, and I'm sorry that happened. I'm surprised only because one of the consortium members, we keep them on the 1820 team. We tried to pick somebody out of each of the different groups so that they could go back and keep everybody informed, so we'll make a point of it.
Okay, thank you very much.
My name is Jason Bowie, and I'm a homeowner in Plymouth. I guess all my questions have been answered at this point. I just wanted to come up and state my enthusiasm for this project, and I really hope it's something that the town does go forward with. Earlier, somebody asked if there was an alternative, and the answer was that none had been considered. I don't think there are any at this point. The town hall we have now is too small, and it's kind of embarrassing. We should really have a building that we can be proud of, and this is probably our only choice.
Alan Zanotti, PGDC. First of all, thank you all very much for a wonderful presentation. Obviously, a lot of time and effort. Certainly, I would like to see this building used for public purpose. 3 points, I guess. One is that I share very much Mike Gabini's concerns that I really think this is too much in this spot. One of the reasons, obviously one of the reasons is because we own this building down there. Another reason in the past was that we wanted to do something to help revitalize downtown. Downtown, to a large degree, has come back quite a bit. I have a building there, and it's maybe a little bit more dependent on one sort of service than it ought to be, but it's come back pretty strong. But clearly, there's going to be a need for some structured parking here. The PGDC, we've always looked at this space up there that we're going to need to move cars just from a little further down in the district up there with employees' cars and such. So there are plans for some of that parking. And anything that goes in this building is going to need some of that parking, but the intensity of Town Hall is going to need structured parking, and that's probably, my guess, is going to add another $5 million to the project. The second thing, a former selectman had mentioned, or had written in the colony about the possibility of moving the library to this building. That would be a purpose that would seem to make sense, and I don't know if that's anything that is actually feasible, if Town Hall would fit up there on South Street with some additions, if there's enough land, if there's how much building there is there. The third thing, because I've heard before, when we build schools, tear schools down, build schools, that there is a 50% reimbursement, I guess somewhere around there, state and federal. I don't know, I'd love to recover from Plymouth North being torn down, because I think that would have made a tremendous municipal center there. But, you know, knowing that, you know, we tore that down, I guess this may be coming down. Nathaniel Wood, that school, if we're going to be asked at some point for that school to be replaced, that building there, which is very large, maybe that could be repurposed for a town hall, for a library if it doesn't end up here, for the school department offices. The police department, I don't know if we've got environmental issues there, or if we don't, maybe we could sell all those buildings, and you know, again, this would be a future thing, but we move all of these municipal buildings to one central location downtown, because some towns and cities aren't the best landlords. I won't say that Plymouth falls in that category, but having it all in one facility might make some sense, again, especially if there's a 50% reimbursement for a school that maybe we're going to be dealing with shortly down the road. And you know, in the society that we live in today, unfortunately, where things seem to be getting a little more violent, having one municipal building secured, because I think our municipal buildings at some point in the near future are going to be like federal buildings, they're going to be like courthouses, and having it all under one roof with one entrance and that sort of thing might make some sense.
Hi, my name is Christina Hurley. I have been a lifelong resident of Plymouth. All my questions have been answered at this point through the presentation and everybody else. I just want to say that I am in favor of reusing this building. I think it's a gorgeous building, and
Thank you.
Dan Sylvester, Precinct 8, town meeting member. Just a quick couple questions. Are there any plans, additional plans for the current, if this were to go through, anything that's going to be for the use of the current building, resale or repurpose or reuse, and costs that go along with that?
We've talked about 11 Lincoln Street and what some of the options would be. Initially, the feasibility study showed that the school administration building, which has less public use than the town hall, that would be a nice fit, particularly because there's a school across the street. So that's something that's still in consideration, and then we would sell the building in West Plymouth where the current school administration is. Of course, this would happen after the fact because we would still be in town hall during that construction phase. We've also had some internal conversations. If the school administration building was not to come to 11 Lincoln Street, we were to sell that location, being right on a residential street, it seems like something that would be appealing to a contractor or developer for some kind of condominiums. And David, do you recall what we thought would be a value for that building? We had an old appraisal on 11 Lincoln Street that we took at. Bill, can you grab a microphone and answer that for me? 1.4 million? About $1.5 million for 11 Lincoln Street if we were to sell it. But those decisions haven't been made yet.
One other question, just in regards to the graph that we had with the zigzags and projected. Get that one up there.
It's in the other presentation.
Yeah. Oh, it's there. Had that up there. But my question would be, when we had those spikes in the 2020, what would be the borrowing capacity that we would go to? Has anybody projected how much we have to kind of to balance out that tax rate to? You said that we could possibly bring some funds in from reserves.
Those two spikes, now, it is based on a lot of assumptions as to the timing of different So each year as we go out, those spikes may come down based on the timing of something. So what we try to do internally is each year we look at the next few years and try to smooth out any of those spikes that we can with the timing of when we go out to borrow money. That's one option that we would look at as we go out. The second option is, and we've done this in the past, is in a couple of years where we've had spikes, we could use either other available funds like free cash or stabilization or surplus, overlay surplus to sort of fund those spikes, to sort of smooth them out. So those are possibilities if we do actually have those spikes in the next 2 years.
But there's no projection as far as what the number, how much we have to kind of put into it to kind of keep it in the average, I guess, going across. I guess it might just.
Well, I mean, to eliminate that spike, because I believe that's 110, 20. So it's probably like a couple of $1 million, you know, those spikes, what that represents.
All right, thank you.
Hi, I'm Zelda. I live in Plymouth, Zelda McGregor, sorry. And I think it's a great project. It was a great presentation and answered all the questions that I have. It's called a municipal center for a reason, and it should be in the center of town, not on South Street, where it would be, I think, strange. And I couldn't be more delighted with the possibilities, not just for the local business that it'll affect, but for all of us who are residents and want to go to town hall. So thanks, everyone.
Thank you. Okay, if we have taken all the questions, we'll make all this information available to you. I think there's a lot to think about. We've provided you with a ton of information this evening. If you have any questions, please feel free to reach out to any of us or directly to my office on the 3rd floor, and we can walk you through any issues that have come up tonight. Thank you.